Despite their long-standing animosity during the Cold War, the emergence of a new global order following the Soviet Union's collapse has witnessed American and Russian special forces collaborating on various missions. Both nations actively combat common enemies who promote extremist ideologies and terrorism, serving as the elite vanguard of their respective national military forces. However, a key question arises. How similar or different are the U.S. and Russian special forces? This episode of the Infographics Show delves into the contrasting approaches of the U.S. Special Forces compared to Russian Special Forces. The term Special Forces encompasses elite military units entrusted with unconventional or exceptionally demanding operations that require exceptional skill and often involve considerable risk. Special Forces have always existed, even if not formally recognized, throughout history, evident in examples like the legendary 300 Spartans, who aided thousands of Greek soldiers in repelling a Persian invasion in ancient Greece, or the infamous Otto Skorzeny and his daring raids against Allied targets during World War II. At their core, special forces are nothing more than highly skilled operatives carrying out missions that are too complex or demanding for larger conventional forces to handle. It wasn't until after World War II that militaries around the world formally established small elite units and officially designated them as special forces. Regardless of their origin, all special forces share 5 core mission types. Counterinsurgency. While the counterinsurgency role of Special Operations Forces has gained prominence in recent years due to America's global war on terror, the initial substantial deployment of special forces in counterinsurgency operations occurred during France's and later America's war in Vietnam. Partisans and terrorists have consistently posed a significant threat to friendly military forces, undermining any potential gains made by defeating conventional forces. Partisans and terrorists can be difficult to combat because they don't wear identifiable uniforms and engage in asymmetrical warfare, or irregular warfare, typically operating from within friendly lines. The need to counter these elusive threats gave rise to one of SF's most crucial missions: counterinsurgency. Counterinsurgency operations combine law enforcement and military missions, requiring detective skills to track and locate insurgents and then eliminate or apprehend them. With the high risk of collateral damage, particularly civilian casualties, counterinsurgency is best suited for special forces rather than conventional forces. Some argue that the U.S.'s heavy reliance on conventional forces in Vietnam contributed to their poor performance in the war. Unconventional warfare. Undoubtedly the cornerstone of special forces operations, unconventional warfare, or UW, encompasses a vast range of mission types. These can include targeted assassinations of high-value targets, or HVTs, disruption or overthrow of governments, or conducting guerrilla raids deep within enemy territory. A special forces icon, Major Benjamin Tallmadge fought the British during the American Revolutionary War and was renowned for leading raids deep into enemy territory, targeting British supply trains, burning them to the ground, or stealing supplies to provide much-needed arms and ammunition to American forces. Though criticized at the time by his military peers, particularly other American officers who considered his wartime tactics improper, Major Tallmadge has become a hero to the American SF community and a template for Special Forces doctrine for centuries to come. Direct action. Direct action missions can be best described by a motto familiar to many American soldiers: our job is to kill the enemy and break his sit. From seizing and capturing high-value personnel, materials, or locations, to outright destruction of enemy assets, direct action engagements are high-intensity, short-duration encounters designed to surprise the enemy and strike them when and where they least expect it. This is another area where special forces excel over conventional forces. With smaller unit sizes and more specialized skill sets, special forces are able to move much more quickly and thus strike in more unexpected ways or times than larger, less maneuverable conventional forces. Foreign internal defense. Foreign internal defense missions involve special operations forces training and equipping foreign allied military forces. Unlike security force assistance missions, foreign internal defense operations are more focused on aiding allied foreign forces to combat insurgency, terrorism, and even disrupt enemy special forces missions against them. Today in Korea, American Special Forces regularly train with their South Korean counterparts to respond to and eliminate the threat from North Korean Special Forces. With an estimated Special Forces strength of over 200,000 soldiers, South Korea faces a formidable security challenge in the event of war against North Korea's most elite soldiers. Special Reconnaissance. Special Reconnaissance missions are a major part of why American SF forces are nicknamed the Quiet Professionals. Typically consisting of very small unit sizes, SR missions are designed to gather information deep within hostile or politically sensitive territory with the explicit goal of never being detected. Valuable intelligence can be rendered useless if an enemy realizes it has been discovered. So SR missions require the utmost stealth and secrecy. Sometimes SR missions are carried out in extremely politically sensitive situations, requiring complete disavowal of any involvement by the nation conducting them. This means that any discovered or captured operatives may be completely on their own, making SR missions some of the riskiest a Special Forces operative can undertake. Security Force Assistance. Security Force Assistance operations involve the use of Special Forces to coordinate with friendly allied militaries and aid them with training and developing military doctrine. Long a hallmark of U.S. Army Rangers, SFA operations may range from making contact with guerrillas deep within enemy territory, or simply a deployment to an allied, less developed nation that needs help establishing a proficient military force. So with similar missions and, in recent times, similar terrorist enemies, how do U.S. and Russian Special Forces compare to each other? With the vast majority of their operations kept secret for decades, it is impossible to definitively determine which force is more effective than the other, as there are few, if any, true points of comparison. Furthermore, due to differences in ideology and doctrine, U.S. and Russian Special Forces may undertake many of the same mission types, but their execution and motivations can vary significantly. The old adage of apples and oranges may aptly apply here. Nevertheless, we can examine some major similarities and differences between the two. Both nations operate a number of different units under the general designation of Special Forces, whose missions and training can vary dramatically. However, one of the major differences between U.S. and Russian Special Forces is the composition of their units. American Special Forces tend to adhere to a doctrine of skill specialization, where each member of a team possesses a unique specialty and numerous overlapping subspecialties. For instance, one team member will be the team medic, but will also have training in communications and demolitions, even though their primary role is as a medic. Russian Special Forces tend to favor a more general approach without unique specializations, which is why, overall, Russian Special Forces are more focused on the direct action mission of special operations. This deficiency has been recognized in modern times, leading to some expansion in training for Russian operators. While select American Special Forces, such as Army Rangers and Navy SEALs, share a similar and more narrow focus, the American Special Forces community as a whole is a far more flexible entity than Russian Special Forces, capable of undertaking a greater variety of missions and bringing more varied disciplines to the table. The narrower focus of Russian Special Forces is a legacy of the Soviet era, when the Soviet military forced their special operations forces to concentrate almost exclusively on destroying NATO missiles and high-value targets in the event of war. Another major difference between U.S. and Russian Special Forces is a general disregard for collateral damage by Russian operators, who prioritize results over public perception. One famous example is the response to the kidnapping of 4 Soviet diplomats in 1980 by the Muslim Brotherhood, conducted in retaliation for Soviet support of Syrians. Dispatching the KGB's Alpha Group, the Russian operatives arrived in Beirut, Lebanon, just as one of the hostages was executed. Instead of moving to rescue the remaining hostages, Russian operators tracked down and took hostage several family members of the terrorists, torturing and dismembering them, and sending body parts to the terrorists. This tactic worked, and the remaining hostages were released. No Russian diplomats were harmed again for 2 decades in the Middle East. However, while Russia's adoption of brutal tactics may have been effective in this specific case, it comes at a major cost of public perception and could actually backfire by provoking public anger against Russia. Russia's ongoing struggles with Chechnya are believed to be exacerbated by brutal retaliatory measures by Russian security forces. The preference for the hammer over the surgical knife is a long-standing hallmark of Russian military doctrine, further evidenced by the slow adoption of precision-guided munitions by a military that prefers to intimidate through overwhelming firepower, with little regard for collateral damage. This doctrine would once again come into play during the Moscow theater hostage crisis of October 2002, when 850 hostages were taken by Chechen terrorists. After 2.5 days of deadlock and no concessions from either side, Russian special forces pumped an undisclosed gas into the building and initiated an assault that resulted in the deaths of all 40 terrorists. However, as an adverse reaction to the mystery gas, 130 hostages also died. When Islamic militants took several hundred school children and teachers hostage in Beslan in September 2004, Russian special forces once again laid siege to the hostage takers. After a fierce firefight, all of the terrorists were killed, but so were 186 children and 20 Russian operators. Witnesses reported that many of the Russians died or were wounded trying to heroically shield children from the fighting. For decades, the U.S. has strived to establish a safer and more structured world order to avoid the mistakes of pre-World War II Europe, seeking to maintain its identity as a global leader, recent presidential elections notwithstanding. Recognizing that heavy-handed tactics like Russia's would jeopardize that perception, U.S. Special Operation Forces are more focused on avoiding unnecessary deaths and adhering to rules of engagement. While this may occasionally limit their effectiveness in a given situation, it preserves a generally positive perception of American special forces, making them welcome in nations around the world as they aid allies and regional partners, such as the Philippines, in combating their own terrorist threats or improving their military capabilities. The American SF doctrine of maintaining a light footprint effect does, however, come with a caveat. In the past 2 decades, they have suffered significant casualties in their efforts to combat terrorism around the world. It is impossible to truly determine which force is better than the other without directly pitting the two nations in open conflict, which, thankfully, has never happened. However, from the bold parachute raids behind German lines into occupied Soviet territory in World War II, to daring attacks against British supply lines during the American Revolutionary War, both Russian and American special forces share a common heritage of courage and professionalism. While they may differ in doctrine and ideology, ultimately both Russian and American special forces have one similar job: kill the enemy and break his sit. So which do you think is a better approach? Russian doctrine of overwhelming force or America's precise surgical strikes? Which would you rather serve with? Let us know in the comments. Also, be sure to check out our other video, What to Do If There Is a Nuclear Explosion. Thanks for watching, and as always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. See you next time.